These days, people love to give themselves labels in their work and their career. I'm an accountant. I'm in marketing. I'm a software developer. Okay, but how does that translate to making lots of money? The point of working isn't to have a career. The point is to make money. This isn't to disrespect those professions by any means, just to point out that since you're working to make money, you need to make sure you're making a lot of it, otherwise you're wasting your time. If you're working really hard in your career, but not making a lot of money, maybe it's time to transition from the business of having a career to the business of making money instead. The business of making money. What are the three components of the business of making money? The first is that you need to be spending more of your time actually making money. Obvious, but the second is that you have to be willing to switch or move seamlessly between industries, adaptability. The third is that you've trained yourself to think outside the system. You don't look to anyone else for authority or permission. So how does this work? Component one, spending more of your time actually making money. He who works all day has no time to make money. It's a John D. Rockefeller quote. Rockefeller, one of the richest men of all time, knew that it's incredibly difficult to become wealthy if you're spending most of your time on details that don't matter. You need to be spending most of your day on high ROI, needle-moving tasks. What exactly those tasks will be depend on your profession. But I can almost guarantee that's not how you're spending your time right now. Think about your workday. How much time is wasted? How much time of that day is spent actually making money? Generally, for a non-sales employee, the answer is that less than 10% of your time is spent actually making money. There's no getting around it. That's incredibly inefficient. Your goal is to make money and you're wasting 90% of your time. How much faster do you think you could reach your goals if you spend 100% of your time trying to make money instead of 10% of your time? Maybe it wouldn't take 1/10 the time to reach your goals, but it would certainly be faster. Let's use an accountant as an example. Accountants spend almost zero of their time making money. Think about a day in the life of an accountant for a real estate private equity firm, for example. They pay invoices, they receive payments, and they record payments. Essentially, their job is organizing, formatting, and reporting. This directly generates minimal revenue. In fact, they're not even making any money at all. They're a cost center. Yes, I'm aware that accounting is a necessary and vital function of real estate private equity shop, but the point stands that they're not directly making the firm any money. This is a problem. What about accountants who run their own shop? The average salary for an accountant in New York City is around 60 grand a year, right? 5K a month. An accountant who runs his own shop can easily replace that income with only one client. This is because he replaces some of that time spent doing tasks that don't matter with time spent selling his business to clients. This change is small, but significant. While an accountant does not directly make money, an accountant selling his services does directly make money. If, using the example above, the accountant had previously been spending 10% of his time making money, he can now ratchet that up to 25% or even 50%, basically time spent selling his services. This is a massive difference that really shouldn't be understated. Based on the fees I've seen accountants rake in, I would guess accountants running their own shop, even a real kind of one-man consulting shop, making 25K a month with ease. So roughly 5 times the amount. Component 2, willingness to switch industries, really adaptability. Let's take a look at a few of my favorite business role models of all time. Aristotle Onassis, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and various Italian mobsters. Obviously, Italian mobsters not in terms of ethics, but in terms of ruthless efficiency. What do they all have in common? They spent all of their time making money. No time was spent on nonsense. With a work schedule like theirs, Aristotle Onassis in particular was famous for almost never sleeping. It's almost impossible to not make money. So we've already established that you should be spending way more of your time making money than you currently are. That's the non-negotiable first step. But what else can we learn from these businessmen? They weren't afraid to change industries if need be. They were in the business of making money, not the business of having a structured career. Aristotle Onassis started off as a tobacco trader. He soon realized that the real money was in shipping and transitioned to industry as becoming a shipping magnate and one of the richest men in the world. Cornelius Vanderbilt started off as a sailboat operator, then switched to steamboats when he realized steam was the future. Eventually, he transitioned out of steamboats into railroads when he realized the profit potential and monopolistic power they held. Mobsters do it a bit differently. Instead of transitioning in and out of industries, mobsters have this concept of rackets. Rackets are essentially different businesses and hustles that the mobster operates, usually at the same time. And no mobster only had one racket. Some of these mobsters were operating 5, 10, even 20 businesses at once. They were actually kind of the original private equity firms. Contrast this to your average employee who works on only 5% of one business. Not hard to see how mobsters make so much money. Yes, obviously a lot of what they're doing was illegal, but most people could not make $5 grand a month illegally before getting called into the cops and getting arrested. The point is that mobsters are willing to adapt to make money. They're not married to the concept of making money strictly as an accountant or strictly as a lawyer. To them, money is money, and they trust their ability to make it regardless of the line of work. They're confident that their abilities transcend petty career labels. A great example of this is Paul Vario. This is Paulie from Goodfellas. Vario was involved in hijackings, loan sharking, bookmaking, and a ton of actually legitimate businesses as well, including a flower shop, bars, restaurants, taxi stands. So at a minimum, he was involved in 7 different rackets. I think in reality, it was way more than that. How much was he making from these rackets? Apparently at his peak, $25K a day. And this was obviously back in the late 1900s. $9 million a year. Was he a restaurateur by trade? No. Did he make money in the restaurant business? Yep. Say what you will about mobsters, but you have to admire their brazen confidence to make money in any business they set their mind to. Another example is Michael Francis, a member of the Colombo family. At the height of his career in the 1980s, he was earning $8 million a week with a gasoline scam. Did he say, hey, sorry, I'm an accountant, I don't know anything about oil? Absolutely not. He went out there and figured out how to operate the business, even though I'm sure he knew just as little about the gasoline business as you and I do when he first started. Most people these days, though, would pass on an opportunity like that, assuming it were legal, since it's not in their chosen career path and not what they were trained to do. It's not what they feel comfortable doing. That's because most people aren't in the business of making money. They're in the business of having careers. Mobsters, however, are in the business of making money. Component 3, getting rid of the artificial boundaries, basically training yourself to think outside the system. Why are mobsters so good at making money? In addition to their willingness to adapt, the main reason is that they don't construct artificial boundaries around it. Most mobsters grew up on the streets. They answered to no one and generally did as they pleased, very often leading to their arrest. This means that they were never part of the system. By the system, I mean basically the track that nearly everyone follows these days, elementary school to middle school to high school to college to the first job to contributing to your 401k. By the time the track finally ends, there's not much more life to live. The track also leaves very little margin for error. Can't mess up in high school because then you won't get into a good college, which means you won't get a good job, which means your business of having a career is already ruined even though you're only in high school. Remember, most people think that if you're gunning to be a lawyer, you can only make money as a lawyer. It's a ridiculous way to approach making money, and even more ridiculous way to approach life. Mobsters don't worry about any of this crap, and to a certain extent, you shouldn't either. They care about making money, so they end up making a lot of money. Most people care about staying on track and having a career, so they end up having a career. But that's where most people go wrong. Having a career doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make a lot of money. Maybe it's time to start thinking like a mobster. Unlearning. I know a lot of people who spent 4+ years in college, spent $250K and are making $5 grand a month at a job they hate. They can do better than that. This isn't an insult, it's actually a compliment. Their potential is higher, they just need to find a way to tap into it. A large portion of this is unlearning what they've learned. People spend almost all of their lives from age 2 to age 65 listening to some form of authority figure. They grow up listening to teachers and then they start working for bosses. School instills this mentality of asking the teacher. It makes you think that there's someone else who has all the answers and that person's not you. Except it's not true. There is no teacher. No one's coming to help. There's only you. Once you realize that and can take full control over your own life, that's when the money typically starts pouring in. Needless to say, this ask the teacher mentality needs to be wiped from your brain. You'll be shocked at what you can accomplish by yourself once you start from a clean slate. Most people would literally be better off if you wiped their brains of all schooling and career knowledge and just dropped them in the middle of the city and told them, find a way to make money. Within a few months, they'd probably be making more money than they are in their career. You need to train yourself to think outside the system. You need to train yourself to think that you, and really no one else, can solve the problems that arise in your own life. And you can learn the ins and outs of new lines of business if you want to. You should be acting like a mobster, only ethically. If you see a chance to make money, you pursue it, even though it's not your stated career. This doesn't mean that you run around like a chicken without your head, pursuing opportunities and dropping them left and right. That would be stupid. But methodically pursuing money-making opportunities as they arise, even if it's not in your career expertise, that's a smart way to operate. So the point of this video isn't to convince you to quit your job immediately. The point is to make you take a long, hard look at your life and think, could I be doing better if I adjusted how I spent my time and how I view the process of making money? The answer is almost certainly yes. The point is to encourage you to think about your daily actions and see how you can increase your time spent making money up from 10% to as high as possible. The point is to show you that maybe the path you're taking right now isn't the best option. Maybe it's high time to switch over from the business of having a career to the business of making money.